Good evening, everyone. I think there's several people here now, so we'll make a start in a few minutes. But what I'd like to do is welcome you to tonight, which is the first of R.M.Jones talks for 2023. And tonight we're covering quite an important topic, especially to sheep farmers, because it revolves around sheep, which is maximising your lambing performance through better nutrition for your ewes. Obviously, we've had a pretty tough old summer on the sheep. They've been dry. There's not been much feed around the place. And then we've had a pretty dry autumn, and now it's gone wet, cold, miserable. They're taking a lot of feed to keep the condition on them, and maintaining that body condition score or improving it is going to be crucial going forward to maximize our lambing performance. Our speaker tonight is Alison Bond from Rumenco. Many of you will know Alison both from her being on farm with us when we've come around and talked through nutrition with yourselves, or she's given various presentations to us previously. Alison has quite a lot of experience in the industry, a huge amount of experience in the industry. She graduated from Harper Adams with a PhD only a few years ago and has had over 15 years of experience at Rumenco, solving nutrition riddles for people and providing practical on-farm support and technical support, both for farmers and for Rumenco nutrition teams. As ever, we have a question and answer session, and you can ask questions through the whole of the meeting. You'll need to put these in the question and answer box, which if you click at the top of your screen, you'll see a Q&A box. Click on that, it'll bring up a screen on your right-hand side, and that will allow you to type in a question, which we'll ask through the course at natural breaks through the course of the evening. We'll also have questions at the end of the evening to fill in, and if there's any ones you want to add or put in there, please ask as many questions as you want. The meeting will be recorded, and for that reason, we've had to turn off microphones and turn off cameras. We don't want to pick anyone up who's wandering around in their underpants. It's never a good look, or eating their dinner. So in the meantime, I'll hand over to Alison. Alison, it's all yours.
Thank you, John. I'm trying to get the image of people sitting. Yeah. Anyway, I'm going to share my screen. You have to let me know that it's there for you.
Okay, we have a screen that says Optimising Ewe Nutrition for Better Lambing Results with your name on it.
That's a good start, isn't it? That's an absolutely cracking start. Right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us in this sort of first week back up and running. As John says, my name's Alison Bond. I work for Rumenco. I'm their technical services manager. And yes, I have been there for some number of years now. So as John's mentioned already, this evening I want to talk about feeding the ewe on the approach to lambing. Fair few quite lengthy topics to try and touch on this evening. First of all, going to start by looking at that late pregnancy and how we're going to prepare your ewes. Talk about the importance of body condition score, and any of you that have been to any of my presentations will know that body condition score is something that I think is really important, and undertaking that on farm and following through with that is really key. We're going to talk a little bit about forage as that base component of that diet on the approach to lambing, and talk a little bit about what we're seeing this year and the effect that might be having. And then finally, we're finishing by looking at sort of how we might balance that diet. So the importance of things like compound feeds and supplementary feeds as we go into that late pregnancy period. So we will kick off. That late pregnancy period, so from day sort of 90 through to 145 and lambing, is a really critical time in the sheep season. We know from figures that are out there that lambing time alone is responsible for around 75% of ewe deaths and 70% of lamb deaths. And so a large amount of any cost that's incurred is going to happen at that time. We also know that in that last 6 weeks, 70% of fetal growth occurs. So 8 weeks pre-lambing, our fetus weighs about 800 grams. By birth, they're going to be 4.5 kilos. So there's a lot going on in that last 8 weeks, a huge amount of growth and development to do in a relatively short space of time. And this puts a lot of stress on the ewe, pulls a large amount of nutrients from her diet, increases her requirements for things like energy and protein and minerals and vitamins. But not only that, during this time, her udder is also developing. That she's laying down her milk cells ready to produce colostrum, ready to produce milk. And so her feeding regime during this time will very much influence that colostrum quality. And we know that nutrition from mid-pregnancy onwards is a key driver of quality and quantity of colostrum. And we know that that colostrum is really important. And I will talk a little bit more about colostrum a bit further on. So as we've already mentioned, her energy and protein requirements are increasing quite rapidly. They might even be doubling for those animals carrying twins or triplets. But as that lamb grows, it's going to take up more room inside as well. So our poor ewe, her appetite is reduced by about 30%. So it's really important to increase the nutrient density of the ration, to understand what you're feeding and what her requirements are, to keep pace with that fetal growth. Any undernutrition of a ewe in late pregnancy has been demonstrated to influence a number of things, not just in the short term, but also in the longer term as well. So it can affect low lamb birth weight and survival rate. It can reduce udder weight and mammary development. It's therefore going to impact on colostrum production or milk production. That's going to influence reduced lamb growth rate. It can affect the bond between a ewe and its babies. It can cause things like pregnancy toxemia or twin lamb disease. So lots of things can occur if we don't get that nutrition quite right in that last 6 weeks. I think all pre-lambing presentations I ever do, I always manage to put this slide up because I think it's a really good demonstration of what's going on in that ewe in that last 6 weeks. So on the picture on your left there, you've got a barren ewe. She's obviously empty. That big black space taking up over half of her internals is her rumen. So you can see she's got plenty of space to eat, to process. Our sheep on the right hand side is a twin lamb. She's about 100 days into gestation, so she's about 7 weeks pre-lambing, and you can see how much smaller her rumen is. You can see her baby lambs there down at the bottom, and you can see how much smaller that rumen is as her growing lambs are pushing up into that space. So whilst her nutritional requirements are increasing, her ability to eat is decreasing by the day. So our key message really is that this period it's got to be about meeting those greater demands for energy and nutrient by feeding the most nutrient dense diet that we possibly can. And I think this diagram here demonstrates it again quite nicely, and don't be put off by the hideous graphs. The blue line there demonstrates your dry matter intake. So you can see in that sort of as pregnancy progresses, that dry matter intake is decreasing. On the flip side, the red line is our energy requirements in megajoules. So again, as we progress through pregnancy, you can see that energy increasing. What we have is that the green shaded area represents the potential gap the ewe has in her requirements for nutrients, and those nutrients being energy and protein and vitamins and minerals, all on the approach to lambing. And what we're trying to do in that last 6 weeks is we're trying to manage that green gap. So we're not going to change her energy requirements, that's fixed. But what we can do is manage the nutrient density of that dry matter that she can eat, so that we're managing that green gap and we're reducing the risk of things like twin lamb disease and issues at lambing time. So as we've seen, as our ewes approach lambing, the diet balance is quite crucial to prevent problems. In general, ewes have a fundamental requirement for energy, protein, and an adequate supply of quite a wide range of minerals, vitamins, and trace elements. So over the next couple of slides, I just want to just dig a little bit more into those energy and that protein and what some of the terms mean that we perhaps throw around at this time of year. So energy is probably the most important nutrient, and it's probably the first one that we should be talking about. So we talk about energy from a metabolizable energy point of view, so ME. And this is the amount of energy that's actually available to the animal, and we measure it in megajoules per day. All feeds have an ME value. Some may be higher than others, obviously, but all feeds will have an ME value. That ME is provided by sugar, starch, and fibre in the diet. We want to have quite a mix of these three ingredients. So you things like your quickly digested sugars, so things like molasses, they give you an instant energy hit. Your slightly slower digested starch type products, which might be cereals, that will help to maintain energy levels over a longer period. And then finally, your kind of your digestible fibers, so things like your sugar beet pulp for a longer lasting energy source. And if you think about it from sort of our kind of diet, if you get to the end of the meeting tonight and I've talked and you just think, oh, I need to eat, you might grab a Mars bar out the cupboard really quick. That's your quick energy hit, that's your molasses. But actually then you might sit down for a bowl of porridge, and that would be your much longer period, stretch out. for energy. And then finally, you might finish off with an apple, which gives you that kind of digestible fibre, which again helps to keep you full for longer. So in terms of the energy needed by our ewe on the approach to lambing, we talk about megajoules required per ewe per day. And the requirements of a ewe will vary depending on the stage of production, how close to lambing she is, whether she's carrying twins or triplets, her body condition score. And there's lots of really great information and tables available now to determine a ewe's energy requirements on the approach to lambing. So it's something that you can quite simply do yourself. AHDB have lots of lovely stuff. You can just go on and get it. In general, a ewe will require around 8 megajoules of energy per day for maintenance. So she doesn't actually need very much. However, if she's carrying twins, by lambing time, her energy requirement will have doubled. So we're talking about 16 megajoules of energy as she approaches lambing. And we need to meet these energy requirements, otherwise we put her at risk of problems such as twin lamb disease. And so again, you know, that emphasises the importance for understanding the diets you've got on farm already. And we'll talk a bit more about forage in particular, but understanding the forage ME level, so then you can build up on top of that, what else they need on top of that. So triplets, for example, will have a 10% higher energy requirement than twin bearing ewes in later lactation. So, you know, increasing 7 weeks pre-lambing, you're increasing her energy requirement from about 12 megajoules to 20 megajoules. So it's quite a big difference. Our second really important nutrient element as lambing approaches is protein. And over the last couple of years, there's been quite a lot of talk about protein and the type of protein that should be fed on the approach to lambing. And hopefully, as I talk through this diagram, which again looks a bit overcomplicated, it will try to help to explain some of the differences between the protein in the diet. So I'm going to see if I can manage to put a laser pointer on here so that we can have a look at it. So ruminant animals get their metabolizable protein. So that's here. The metabolizable protein is the true protein. It's the protein that's absorbed by the intestine and available for use by the animal. And they get that protein from two main sources. The first source is their microbial protein. So that's this down here. So it looks quite complicated, but it's basically protein that's produced by the can't get that to work now. There we go. By the rumen microbes, and they produce this metabolizable protein, or this through microbial protein, sorry, through the breakdown of non-protein nitrogen and rumen degradable protein. So anything containing things like urea or grass that contains high levels of rumen degradable protein, it will go into the rumen, and combined with fermentable energy, the bugs will basically work on it and they will produce this microbial protein. And this protein, in combination with the microbes that die and then are washed out, skipped on, will provide about 60 to 70% of our metabolizable protein. The remainder of our metabolizable protein then comes from a source of protein called our digestible undegradable protein. And this basically means it's protein that's not degraded in the rumen. It's almost bypassed the rumen, bypasses the bugs, but is then degraded further on down in the intestine. So over the last few years, research has told us that our metabolizable protein requirements, so our true protein that the animal needs for milk production in that later lactation, have steadily increased. And this is probably because our breeding has improved, and we are pushing our animals that little bit harder as well. And what they are suggesting is that these additional requirements for protein can probably not be met by microbial protein supply alone. So we're already pushing our rumen bugs quite hard. So you can't feed more rumen degradable protein and push that system a bit harder. And it's sort of suggesting that animals may be between 20 to 30% deficient in this metabolizable protein on the approach to lambing. And this can affect things like the immune, I don't know why these slides are jumping on. It can affect things like the immune system, and it can affect colostrum yield and quality, and it can affect overall animal health as well. So we need to make up this shortfall with better levels in the diet of DUP, or digestible undegradable protein. And in particular, ewes carrying twins and triplets may be at greater risk of protein deficiency. Their colostrum requirement is going to be higher, their milk production needs to be higher as well. So I suppose the key point really for what we're saying here from the protein is that not all protein sources are equal. And in particular on the pre-lambing diet, that's quite important to understand. So we want to be feeding as good a quality protein as we possibly can pre-lambing to provide plenty of digestible undegradable protein. And one such protein source is soya, and that plays a really important role in the pre-lambing diet. And I also understand that soya is kind of not getting a lot of good press at the moment, but there's no getting away from the fact that it has a really nice high level of protein overall, up to 54%. A really high proportion of that protein is digestible undegradable, so it helps push into that metabolizable protein pool. It has a good amino acid profile. It has also had a good energy value, so 14 ME, and it's very palatable and digestible as well. So it really complements that pre-lambing diet quite well. And research would suggest that around 100 grams of soya per lamb carried in the final weeks of pregnancy helps to support colostrum production and animal health. So moving on to look at the key minerals and vitamins and trace elements. There's over 100 minerals in life, but it's estimated that only around 40 of those may have a metabolic role in the body. And some of those are required in such minute amounts that it's rare that there'll be any deficiency under normal practical conditions. So we don't tend to talk about many at all. Within this group of 40, 15 of them are known to be essential for cattle and sheep for good health and productivity. And so what I want to do is I just want to touch on a couple now over the next couple of slides that are important on the approach to lambing. Generally, minerals, vitamins and trace elements are required in relatively small amounts compared to, for example, protein and energy. We're talking sort of milligrams per day, but they have what we call a disproportionate effect on animal performance because they're involved in all aspects of body function. And so that's why they're essential, because nothing happens in the body without at least one mineral, vitamin or trace element being involved, but often multiples. So when you have a deficiency, it will impact on a lot of different performance aspects. And there's a lot of interaction between them. So the first element I want to talk about is vitamin E. It's an essential antioxidant. It helps animals fight off disease. It protects cells from damage that occurs during normal production. So just normal living will produce these antioxidants. And the free radicals and the antioxidants mop them up. So that's just all occurring on a day-to-day basis. Now, vitamin E will work alongside selenium, which is also a natural antioxidant. But in the approach to lambing time, vitamin E will not easily pass across the placenta to the lamb during pregnancy because it's quite a large molecule. So lambs will rely on their vitamin E requirement from the ewe's colostrum and milk after birth. So it's important that the ewe has plenty of vitamin E because that will help improve the vitamin E level in the colostrum and the milk, which is very important for our lamb. And it's been shown that lambs with high vitamin E and selenium status, they stand and they suckle earlier. So improving that lamb vigor and that survivability. So it is really important. So our next element is selenium. And selenium is very important for that baby lamb as it's born. So newborn lambs are at risk of hypothermia. This is when they're basically losing more heat than they're able to generate. So selenium plays a very important role in maintaining body temperature. So like I say, a newborn lamb needs to produce as much heat as possible and not lose so much to the environment. If it doesn't, its body temperature will drop and this results in the hypothermia. Now, shivering helps a lamb to do this. However, shivering requires energy. And before our lamb has received its first colostrum, the lamb must still maintain its body temperature. So the lamb is born with a layer of what we call brown fat. And I always think of the brown fat as being the newborn baby's little hot water bottle. And it's mobilized and broken down very efficiently and very quickly to generate heat to ensure that the lamb gets up and suckles and gets going, and then it can generate its own heat. And this process is called non-shivering thermogenesis. There's only a small amount of brown fat, and it should be sufficient to allow the lamb to get up and suckle and then have the energy to move on. But the process by which that brown fat is used is selenium dependent. Now, unlike vitamin E, selenium can pass across the placenta. So if our ewe is selenium deficient, then our lamb will be selenium deficient. And then they may not trigger their brown fat. They may not, therefore, have the stimulus to stand up and suckle and get going. So this is why selenium is so important in that approach to lambing time. So moving on, the next element I want to talk about is zinc. Zinc occurs widely throughout the body, lots of high concentration in things like skin, wool, hair and horn. So we talk a lot about zinc being very important for tissue health. But it's also involved in quite a lot of biochemical processes which affect a wide range of functions. So in particular, it's involved in the synthesis of proteins, carbohydrates and nucleic acids. But also due to its importance in the tissue health, we think a lot about external tissue. So we think about foot health. It's also really important for internal health as well. So we're talking about things like the gut and the immune system and cell membrane structure and function. We know that levels are quite low in forages, so supplementation is important, and daily utilization and excretion will rapidly deplete the stores in a body. So again, making it even more important that we top up in that pre-lambing period. And then finally, I just wanted to talk about cobalt. Cobalt is a constituent of the vitamin B12, which is manufactured by the microorganisms in the rumen. So because of its role in B12 manufacture, animals' requirement for cobalt itself is quite low. It's the rumen bugs that need the cobalt to be able to manufacture that B12. But it is involved in nervous system integrity. And levels of cobalt above that needed for B12 may improve digestion of poorer quality feeds in the rumen. So cobalt has been linked with fibre digestion and therefore feed efficiency. So again, in a situation where we're trying to make sure that our diet is as nutrient dense and available to that ewe as possible, then we want to give her all the help we can. So before we move on to look in more detail at our pre-lambing diets, and our forages, I wanted to quickly mention body condition score. It's a very useful management tool for sheep farmers. And if we were sat in a room together doing this in person, I'd be asking you all to put your hands up now to tell me how many of you body condition score, and then
Alison,
how many of you, yeah.
Can I interrupt there? There's a couple of questions just come up on the screen.
Yeah.
They'll be WhatsApp to me. Just going back onto the early nutritional, different nutrition sources, one of which was, do peas and beans provide good enough protein? So I assume from that it's the bypass protein, it's the UDP fraction compared to urea, or will a decent quality forage, like in this case 17% crude protein silage, do the job, provide enough protein?
A lot of the so taking the peas and beans, they do have a proportion of digestible undegradable protein, but it's not quite as high as soya. So depending on the diet, yes, and the forage perhaps being fed alongside it, it can be enough. And sometimes just maybe a little top up of something like soya or some rape on there or something like that would be enough. But I'm happy to look at diets, you know that I'm more than happy to run stuff through and have a look in more detail. From a silage point of view, a lot of the protein in silages tends to be rumen degradable. So great that you've got sort of 17%, but you may find you still need a little bit of something else that's going to just top up that digestible undegradable protein level, just to push on the milk really and the colostrum production.
Okay, that's grand. The other bit that came in there is, can we increase brown fat content in lambs? I don't know if we can we?
I don't think you can. I think there was quite a lot of research done a number of years ago, just looking at sort of the brown fat, and that's how they kind of understood more about this non-shivering thermogenesis and the use of the selenium. I think we just need to make sure that they get the most out of what they have got. And I suppose if the ewe is underfed, generally underfed, and the lamb is smaller, then the lamb's brown fat levels will be lower. So I think as long as we feed well, but I don't think we can feed extra of anything. I think if we feed, I think I'm making sense.
I suppose that would be more relevant. If we underfeed,
we will affect it, but I don't think overfeeding will generate more.
I suppose that would be very relevant to those guys lambing outdoors on a hill where those lambs don't really see the inside of a shed. They're going to be lambing out and they're going to be in tough conditions. They want to build that bit of extra resilience.
Absolutely. They want to give that lamb the best opportunity they can. So they want to build They want them up, they want them suckling, they don't want them lying on the ground because they're going to lose a lot of heat to the ground, especially if it's wet as well. And yeah.
Okay, I'll leave you with that. Let you carry on.
Thank you. But I think that leads quite nicely onto the body condition score, because if our ewe is in good body condition score, then our lamb is going to be a good size as well. And there's lots of, I haven't got data here tonight to show you, but there's data to show sort of the mortality is reduced for animals that are larger, and they are better able to cope. So our body condition score is a very useful management tool for sheep farmers. It used all year round to basically ensure that ewes are on target for a system, for the time of year, for what's expected of them. And then flock nutrition can then be managed on the back of it. And that will help support things like fertility at tupping time, but increase lamb performance, reduced incidence of metabolic disease, all those kind of things. And it's really easy to do as well. It's a manual assessment of that muscle and fat over the spine, behind the last rib in the loin area of the sheep. It's easy to learn, it's repeatable, and when the same person does it on a flock of sheep regularly, it's a really useful tool. And it doesn't cost anything as well, and I think that's really, really important. So the scoring scale we use in the UK is 1 to 5, 1 being very thin and fat, 5 being very fat. And we do use half and quarter scores as well sometimes. So one condition score is about 10 to 13% of body weight. So for example, for a 70 kilo ewe, one body condition score is about 7 to 9 kilos in weight. So we can use body condition score individually, or we can look at a range of condition scores in a group of animals. And then any shifts between scorings, so between maybe tupping to mid-pregnancy to lambing, they can be monitored and then action taken and animals split accordingly and then fed accordingly as well. And that's really important, and to just get a sort of full understanding of what's going on. So on the left-hand side of this slide here is a diagram outlining the target body condition scores for ewes at different stages through the production cycle. So I've borrowed this from AHDB. It's quite commonly available on there in all their sort of literature. But the aim really is to regulate body condition scores and to reduce that variation across a flock. So have a target of say 90% of your ewes at the correct body condition score at any one time. So like I say, a good indication of nutritional well-being of an animal. It's a good indication of energy and ensuring ewes are on target for the system and the time of year. And that's going to just help support performance. And in particular, as we approach lambing time now, we want to make sure that those ewes are in good condition. They shouldn't have lost any condition over the mid-pregnancy period. And then we know that actually good body condition score has a positive correlation between the weight of lamb weaned. So body condition score at lambing affects the weaning weight, and any loss of body condition scoring from lambing or gain of body condition score is also linked as well to that body condition score at lambing. So we're trying to get that ewe into the best possible state we can to help her go on through lactation as well. We don't want her to lose too much condition in lactation, because almost immediately her body's going to be starting to prepare for that next tupping. Although you don't want to think about it, it can take up to 6 months for her next ovulation to kick in and be ready. So she'll be producing the eggs that are fertilized at tupping about 6 weeks after she lambs. So really we want to keep her in good condition now, so she's in fit condition, ready for the next tupping period. So how do we achieve our ideal body condition score on the approach to lambing? How do we manage that? So from mid-pregnancy onwards, we want to be feeding the ewe with a couple of aims in mind. So maintaining body condition score, reduce any losses. Historically, we used to talk about losing body condition score between mid-pregnancy and lambing, and that was always thought to be okay, to lose maybe half a body condition score. There's some new data now. AHDB have been doing a massive challenge sheep project, and they're now suggesting that actually that's not a target. We should be trying to maintain. We should get the sheep where we need them to be, and that we should maintain them through that pregnancy. And by doing that, we'll minimise problems such as twin lamb and other metabolic diseases like hypocalcaemia and hypomagnesemia. We want good, healthy lamb birth rates. Like I say, healthy lamb, they're going to be up, they're going to be suckling, and they're going to be away. We want reduced lamb mortality. We want good lamb vigour and bonding with mum. We want the born and up and suckling, and a good level of high quality colostrum as well. And we also want to support that that worm burden as well. Our ewes themselves might be able to cope with a higher worm burden. They've built up an immunity, but our lambs perhaps won't be. And then it's during that lambing time when our ewe is focusing nutrients elsewhere that sometimes we can see those higher worm burdens. So let's move on to look at our ewe diets as we approach lambing. The key ingredient will almost always be some kind of forage. And that might be grazing. If you're lambing later on, it might be silage or it might be hay. But that forage is the cheapest feed on farm. So we should be basing our diets around this key ingredient, and we should be maximising the use of it and maximising those intakes. It's also one of the healthiest ways to feed stock to help maintain rumen health. It's really good for those rumen bugs, and it keeps for a good rumen that's working well and helping to produce that microbial protein that we've already talked about. So to make sure we can get maximum use from it, we need to understand what we've got in front of us. So I would always say, get your forage analysed. Don't just assume it's the same as last year because you cut it on the same day, or you always get it analysed. Somebody, Rumenco will do it. R.M.Jones can sort it for you. You can always get a general feed analysis done very easily enough, and that's your base ingredient, and that's your starting point. This is a table showing the ideal silage for sheep. This is what sheep like to eat. So they like quite dry silages, over a 25% dry matter, and they like well-made silages. They're quite picky. And this will ensure optimum intake as well. The better the quality of a silage, the more the ewe will eat. So in late lactation, our ewe will eat a maximum of about 2 to 2.5% of her body weight. And this equates to about 1.4, 1.75 kilos dry matter. About 60% of this, at least 60% of it, should be from forage. So that equates to about a kilo. And the better the quality, then the more nutrition she'll get from that kilo, then the less cake you maybe need to top up with, or the less extra you need to top up with. And this is demonstrated quite nicely here, that as the quality of the forage being fed increased, so from our straw down to our very good silage, our ME went up from 6.5 to 10.5, 11.5 ME. You can see that as a percentage of her body weight, she could eat much more of the better quality forages in that period as we approach lambing. So the message really here is to feed as good a quality forage as possible to maximise those intakes. So if you've got a couple of forages on farm, I'd have them analysed and I would look at them, and then you can work out which one you feed as you get a bit closer to lambing time. How else can we maximise intakes on the approach to lambing? Well, this is some research that was undertaken in Ireland a couple of years ago, and it shows that the presentation of the silage will also affect the amount of cake needed to be fed to ewes. So you can see here, this is the precision chop silage, and this is the amount of extra cake that was required. And you can see that when the silage was precision chopped, then and the different qualities of it as well, then significantly less extra feeding was required. And this was basically due to easier eating, meaning that more forage could be eaten. They could just eat more of it, and it went through the system a little bit faster. It also demonstrated that improvements in dry matter digestibility, or DMD, also affected requirements again. So that's kicking back to that quality that we've talked about. I get chopping bales is not always going to be possible, but the message really is that if you're feeding whole bales or you're feeding silage, then make sure that access is adequate to encourage intakes. There's plenty of feeding space for all the ewes. Perhaps consider grouping ewe lambs away so they get the opportunity to feed. They're not bullied by perhaps the older animals. And monitor intakes as well against what you think they should be eating. If you perhaps weigh a bale at the start of the season and see how many days that bale will last. And that just gives you an idea of what's going on alongside the nutritional quality you've got as well. And don't forget water as well. Water will improve intake. So ewes on dry diets might need about 4.5 litres of water per ewe per day. And obviously that's going to impact the bedding if you're in a house situation. Whilst you're sort of more moist silage based diets, then that requirement will be a lot less, maybe 2 litres of water per ewe per day. Before we move on away from our forages, I just wanted to demonstrate the importance of knowing your forage quality as you move a bit closer to lambing. So these are some basic numbers just to demonstrate that difference. So we're using a 70 kilo ewe, she's carrying twins. We're assuming she's 3 weeks pre-lambing, and we require 15.3 megajoules of energy per day. We've taken that as a book value, and we assume she eats about 1 kilo of dry matter of forage a day. If you've got a forage that's 9.7 ME, she is going to be missing 5.6 megajoules once she's eaten her kilo of forage. And this is the equivalent of about 0.45 kilos or 450 grams of compound feed based on a 12.5 ME compound feed. So that's your basic diet. She's going to need her kilo of forage, and she's going to need about 450 grams. Now, if that grass silage is actually slightly better quality than you think, and it's 11.1 ME, then the shortage is much smaller. So the shortage then is only 4.2 megajoules. So you actually then only need to feed 350 grams of compound to get up to the same level. And over a period of time, that's quite a saving in compound feed by basically just understanding what you've got on farm. So that difference is not huge, but it can make quite a big difference in terms of use. And with that input cost being quite high at the moment, then the cost of a forage analysis, which is often zero, can actually save you some money in the longer term. So I wanted to look at what we're seeing this year from a forage point of view. And again, don't be put off by this sort of slightly hideous graph. I will talk you through it now. So the red line you can see is our ewe requirement. And so this is along the bottom here is the date, and they've all got a little bit squashed. But we're starting here in March, and we're moving through to September, October. And so you can see here, this is our lambing period, and our energy requirement is obviously quite high. As we go through lactation and drying off, that energy requirement will go low, and then that will pick up again as we try to gain some body condition score and get them sorted for the next tupping time. The blue line here is our 2021 grass. So these figures have been taken from Grass Check GB, and we've been plotting this over the season. So this was last year's grass. So you can see it was reasonably steady. And what we can see here is that most of the season it provided more than enough energy for our ewe apart from at lambing time, which is no real surprise. The black line is this year's grass, and we can see actually that it was considerably different this year compared to last year in terms of energy. And this is not really a surprise when you think about the weather we had and the really dry sort of summer, and a lot of the grass kind of died away, and this has affected the ME, and it has affected the sugar levels in these grasses. So again, for this period of the diet, it was fine, and it provided plenty of energy. But what concerns me is perhaps this period when maybe we were starting to think about getting the animals ready to go to the tup and preparing them for tupping. That grass perhaps wasn't providing enough energy, and at that point then our ewes may have lost some condition. This table here demonstrates the average silage quality that we're seeing this year. And again, I would suggest some of these figures may be a little higher. They may be more dairy type silages than maybe sheep silages, although John's mentioned his 17% protein. So I think there's a real mixed bag, if I'm honest. Because of the weather we had, we're seeing a real variable quality this year. These averages would suggest higher proteins this year, but lower energies and sugars, which again, will impact that available to the animal. So again, it just really emphasizes the importance of getting your forage analysed, knowing what you've got there, and basing everything else around it. So what does this mean for you? Well, you'll probably know better than me. You're in it. You're working with these animals. You'll know what's going on. But certainly the feedback I'm getting is that perhaps ewes are in poorer condition this year as we approach lambing to perhaps what they have been in the past. And this is maybe because they lost condition last summer with the weather being the way it was, and they perhaps just haven't put it back on again. We're starting to hear feedback, some scanning percentages, and it's been suggested that scanning may be down. And again, this may be kicking back to that poorer condition at tupping, which has impacted on that scanning and number of lambs being carried. But then we need to think about the future, really. So how will that affect us next year? Lamb price hasn't been too bad. Well, it's certainly been higher than it has been in previous years. Will that continue if we've got a shortage of lamb in the market because we're going to have a lower number of lambs in which case we really want to look after the ones we have got. And so we need to look after our ewes. We need to support body condition score. We need to at least maintain, if not try and put some back on if they are a little bit low. And this will help to support that milk and that colostrum production. And then that will ensure our lambs get off to a good start and get going in that sort of pre and post lambing period. So again, I come back to sort of understanding that forage quality, understanding that base diet, and then being able to supplement accordingly and work up from there. So what does it mean if we get it wrong? What effect might have poor nutrition in the run up to lambing? Well, quite a lot of the issues that we see may not be quite so obvious straight away. So that first problem might be reduced body condition score. So she's going to be lower condition. We've talked about the importance of correct body condition score. But that poor nutrition might also affect her immunity, and this might result in a rise in fecal egg counts, which can occur around lambing time. As I've already mentioned, the ewes themselves will have built a certain resistance to these worms, but a heavy burden may affect younger lambs, and that's going to stall their growth and affect their future as well. Poor nutrition will affect colostrum quality and quantity. Lambs themselves may be smaller, they'll have less vigour, they'll have a higher risk of mortality. Ewes can be at risk of things like milk fever, retained placenta, pregnancy toxemia, and lambs themselves, if they don't get good quality colostrum, can be affected by things like watery mouth, joint ill, hypothermia, because they just don't get going and they're not able to battle with these things. So this table here looks at when lamb losses occur, and it demonstrates that the majority of lamb losses occur in the 2 days around lambing. So you can see 48 hours, this 49%, so nearly 50% of our lamb losses occur in that first 48 hours of life. The next largest proportion is in mid-pregnancy period between scanning and lambing. So between these two, it equates to almost 80% of lamb deaths occurring from between scanning and lambing. And we're looking in the next slide at the causes of these lamb mortality. But we also know that it's around that time that 75% of ewe deaths occur, as we mentioned right back at the beginning. And that's because of a result of issues such as prolapse and dystocia and difficult lambings and things like that. But that's quite a large proportion of lamb deaths occurring there. So if we look at this slide here, what are those lambs all dying of in the 2 days after being born? Well, this graph shows the 20 most common diagnoses of lamb mortality, and it's taken from the Animal and Plant Health Agency post-mortem submission for lambs up to 7 days of age. So you can see that lambs can die from many different causes, and I'm not going to go through them all. But you can see some of the ones we've already mentioned, things like navel ill and joint ill. But it's mainly due to poor adaptation to neonatal life. So, for example, low vigour, poor thermoregulation, poor ewe-lamb bonding. And a lot of these reasons can be associated with poor ewe nutrition in the later stages of pregnancy and then poor colostrum intake. So this first reason, for which by far exceeds all the others in terms of cause of mortality, is hypogamma-globulinemia, is a term used to define low antibody levels. So antibodies are provided through good quality colostrum. They are affected by the nutrition in the build up to lambing, and they are what gives our newborn lamb its immunity, basically. And so if you have a poor quality colostrum, then you are going to affect the immunity of that lamb, and it's going to become more susceptible to picking things up. Other factors that might affect lamb losses include, quite often things that are out of your hands as well, weather, ewe breeding, litter size, lamb birth weight, ewe behaviour, all these kind of things, mineral status, stress, uterine environment. There's lots of other things that can affect lamb mortality. So yeah, just really kicking on to colostrum then. A lot of lamb losses and a lot of issues in that immediate period post-lambing can be linked back to colostrum and ensuring that our lamb gets good quality colostrum. And to ensure that, we need to make sure that our ewe nutrition is in top condition as well. So why is colostrum so important for our newborn animals? Well, it's produced literally just before parturition, and it differs slightly from milk. It's much denser in nutrients, it provides much more energy, and it also has these good levels of these immunoglobulins, enzymes, hormones, growth factors, all sorts of goodies in there to support that newborn lamb. It's basically a nice rich energy source to help them maintain their temperature early on, and it helps provide hypothermia. It also, like I said, supports this immune system function. So newborn lambs are born gamma globulemic, which means they have no circulating antibodies, which we also call immunoglobulins, or IgG or IgM. Because the placenta separates the maternal and fetal blood supplies during pregnancy, there's no transmission of these immunoglobulins in utero because they're quite a big particle size. So these immunoglobulins are manufactured by the body to help fight against foreign substances and invading diseases. So when a disease enters the body, it stimulates the immune system to produce antibodies, and the antibodies attach or bind themselves to the antigen and basically inactivate it. So that immune system is really important. It's important in us, it's important in the baby lamb as well. So they circulate in the blood and other body fluids, defending against invading bacteria and viruses. Like I say, they're binding with these antigens and deactivate them and destroy them. So our newborn lamb, she needs to ingest and absorb adequate amounts of colostral immunoglobulins, or IgGs, from that colostrum. And then this transfer of antibody via the first milk is known as passive immunity. And it gives the animal this immunity and this chance to start developing its own immune system. It gives it that sort of chance in life. So we often talk about the 5 Qs of colostrum management, and we want the colostrum to be of good quality, and there's nothing wrong in measuring using a Brix refractometer, which would often be used by dairy guys, but it can still be used to measure colostrum in ewes, and we're looking for a 22% reading on that Brix. We want it to happen quickly. We know that the particles, the IgGs, are quite large, and when the animal is first born, that gut lining is quite open to receive those larger particles. But once that animal's been born, that gut lining will change quite quickly, and soon those larger IgG particles won't be able to pass across. So we need that colostrum quickly. We need a good quantity of that as well. So we need enough to ensure you're not going to have hypothermia, ensure that you've got plenty of passive immunity, and ensure that it's enough to get that animal going. And then we talk about squeaky clean and quietly. So squeaky, obviously a bit of a dubious cue, but hygiene absolutely key to that lambing. And it's been demonstrated that animals absorb more from their colostrum if they are fed in a quiet, stress-free environment as well. So this diagram demonstrates quite nicely the passive immunity that we've all just been mentioning. So lambs born with no immunity and no immunoglobulins that will pass through the placenta during pregnancy, they then take in quite a large amount of good quality colostrum, high in antibodies, and it raises the level of these circulating IgGs, so it raises the level of that immunity. But what we can see from this graph is that's relatively short-lived and begins to decline quite rapidly. And then from birth, our animal will start to develop their own active immunity. And this is when the lamb basically develops its own IgGs in response to challenges, in responses to its environment, in responses to its mum. But this can take quite a long time. You can see it's quite a slow process. So there's quite a gap here, which is quite a high risk period when the animal is going to be vulnerable to disease. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to feed the best quality colostrum that we can. So we're trying to make sure that maybe it has to drop from a higher height, maybe you stretch that out, and then we want to provide the correct environment to support that active immunity. So we want to decrease that risk period. And here are my 5 Qs of colostrum management. So again, we've kind of mentioned these already. We've talked about the quality of colostrum, so we're looking for 22% on a Brix. We've talked about the quantity, we're looking for 10% of a lamb's body weight. Immediately post lambing, followed by a second feed within 12 hours of a similar quantity. Quickly, we've already mentioned the particles that are quite large, and then the squeaky clean and the quietly as well. So how do we make the best use of our forage that we have available? How do we help to maintain new body condition score, ensure good colostrum, ensure milk production? So once we've analysed our available forage, we've got an idea of our base diet. We've already looked in our books. We know what our animal's going to need on the approach to lambing. We've undertaken our body condition score. We know whether they need to maintain or gain. Then we might need to look at some kind of diet supplement. And a lot of the time, we would look at feeding some kind of compound. But a couple of things just important to remember about feeding compound feed. It's a substitute for forage. So the more compound that you feed, the less forage that will be eaten. There's quite a lot of choice available out there for pre-lambing compounds. And I would say buy the best you can. You should be looking for an ME of about 12, maybe 12 and a half. It's got to be higher than your forage. Otherwise, you may as well be feeding your forage. And it's not often declared on labels, so don't be frightened to ask for that full formulation. Make sure that the energy in there is coming from good quality ingredients. So rather than sort of high levels of fat, because that's not very good for the rumen. Talk about the protein as well. Again, crude protein alone is not really a good enough value to understand. You want to understand your DUP levels and your RDP levels. And again, don't be afraid to ask about the protein sources that are in there, whether it's soybean, protected protein, or anything else. And if you're not topping up with anything else, make sure that there's a good balance of minerals, vitamins and trace elements in there as well. Look at things like selenium, cobalt, vitamin E, and consider the levels of compound you'll be feeding and whether that's going to supply enough for you. There's been some work to show there's benefit in oversupplying some of the trace elements such as selenium and vitamin E to help improve vigor and survival. So take this into consideration when you're looking at your formulation. And ensure your formulations are consistent as well. Some guys will look at least cost, so they may pull in cheaper ingredients, and this may fluctuate through the season, so your loads might be different, and that's not ideal as you approach lambing as well. Avoid formulations in particular at lambing time which contain lower quality ingredients and fillers such as oat feeds. And when you're looking at your list of ingredients on your labels, just remember they'll be listed in descending order of inclusion. So those at the top are obviously included at the higher level. What about other supplementary feeds? Don't rule out things like blocks, buckets, and liquid feeds. If you've got really good quality forage this year, then in a free access supplement alone might mean that you can cut back on the amount of concentrate you're feeding. We've got situations where singles alone in good condition with good forage in front of them have been able to go on a supplement alone with no cake being fed. They have a different mode of action to your concentrates or your compound feeds because they're fed little and often, so they're almost grazed a little bit like your grass or your forage would be, and this has a nice beneficial effect for the animals and that rumen. And it means that they work alongside the forages that you've got rather than actually substituting, and complements that forage. There's other benefits as well. 24/7 feed availability helps to prevent bullying and it promotes performance as well. And we've seen, nice proven performances, improved body condition, enhanced reproduction and growth. They're also a really good way of getting extra minerals, vitamins and trace elements into animals because most supplements have got a full spec of mins, vits and trace elements in them. So there's a couple of products that would be ideal for this time that R.M.Jones can sort you out with and talk to you in more detail about. The Optimising High Energy is it's a really high sugar, physically hard bucket. It's manufactured through the dehydrated molasses process, and it's got a really nice high energy level, so 16 ME and a nice 12% protein in there as well. It's got consistent intakes due to the manufacturing process. And like I say, a nice high sugar level in there as well, which will help support systems where maybe ewes are particularly at risk of twin lamb disease. That energy will help support body condition. The protein there's a little bit of urea protein as well as natural protein, so that will help support the digestibility of forages, maybe poorer quality forages. And again, helps to make sure the animal can get the most from it. Full spec of minerals, vitamins and trace elements, including some protected elements in there which are more available, and high levels of vitamin E as well. The second and last product is the Sheep Natural Energy. So this is a chemical or poured bucket. So intakes would be slightly higher. It doesn't have that it's not really quite as hard as the Optimising, but again, really nice product, really nice level of energy in there, multiple energy sources. And a high protein, 16.5% 16.5% protein, and that's all natural protein. So a really nice way of topping up that digestible, undegradable protein in the diet. So that, John, might go nicely with your 17% protein forage, which would have lots of rumen degradable protein in there, and lots of full spec of minerals, vitamins, and trace elements, again with the protected levels of selenium and zinc in there. So just as we come to the end here, I think it bit of a sort of a summary, really looking at sort of the key themes in preventing lamb losses, and some of the key things to think about this lambing season is really that kind of, obviously it goes without saying, exceptional hygiene in the lambing shed, the correct pre-lambing nutrition, and linking in with sort of body condition score, and then having a good colostrum management program in place to ensure that those lambs get off to the best possible start in life. So really, just to sum up, that last 6 to 8 weeks prior to lambing are key for lamb development and colostrum and milk production. At that time, our ewes dry matter intake is reducing, and she has greater demands for energy and protein and minerals, vitamins. So that diet is going to be absolutely crucial for understanding the forage available and maximising the intakes of that important diet component, and then using it as your base and then topping up to meet those animal requirements. We talked a little bit about energy and protein, and hopefully I've sort of helped you understand some of the different terms that we may talk about at this time of year. We know that poor nutrition will impact short term, but also longer term as well. Puts an animal at risk of twin lamb disease, will affect the immune system, but can affect later on maybe her next pregnancy, but also our lamb's growth. So think about sort of how we're going to support that ewe on the approach to lambing. Supplementary feeding, ideal for supporting the ewe and her unborn lambs, but make sure you know what your forage is first and top up from there. So that's me finished. Thank you again for joining us this evening. I hope that's been useful. If you've got any questions, then please just tap away.
Thank you, Alison. That's great. That was pretty comprehensive. I feel like I've learned something tonight, more than most nights I sit here at home in the dark by myself. Day. Yeah. There are quite a few questions that have cropped up. A lot of them come on a WhatsApp message. So if you've got some more and you want to WhatsApp me, I'll put my number on there on the chat screen. So I'm going to go through a few if we can.
Okay. Yeah.
One was, one I just added a comment. We talked about silage samples earlier. We can silage sample for you. So if you need a silage sample done, then drop one into the farm centre. Bring about half a kilo. Would you say, Alison, about enough? Half kilo, sort of a big freezer bag full. Yeah. Not a Tesco carrier bag. That's probably a little bit excessive, but half a kilo would be enough. Any forage to get samples. I think there's been a few issues, just slight delays of getting samples back currently, but they're getting quicker again. I think we're back
on it now. So you should be able to, as long as the post, I think the biggest issue was the postal strikes because it was relying on coming in the post. But as soon as we get it, they're being turned around reasonably quick now. So.
Okay, no, that's great. That's getting them back is quite crucial quite quickly.
Yeah.
Then first question is, I didn't have 17% silage. That wasn't mine, by the way. That was someone else's. So he kept saying it was mine. I don't want to boast to say I had 70% silage. I sure didn't. Yeah. This is more like mine. My silage is quite mouldy. Will the heat, I guess, in the summer have affected the silage in the bale?
Yeah, quite possibly. We're, like I said earlier, we're seeing quite a lot of variation, and some of the silages I've seen more recently, they've not gone through a particularly good fermentation, maybe because they were a bit dry, and that's meant that they've not been consolidated as well as they could have been, and that's causing some mycotoxin issues. Or sometimes if they're taken when they're, they haven't gone through, just generally haven't gone through a good fermentation, if the sugar levels were low. I'd be a bit nervous about feeding mouldy silage to ewes on the approach to lambing. Obviously, sometimes you don't have any alternatives, but I would be a little bit nervous.
It's a case of I suppose, where you can, if you do have mouldy bits, just if you're going to just do anything, chuck it into the bedding and the mouldy bits on the edges, and they might just nibble at it, but at least they're not going to be having to force to eat it.
No,
I suppose. The next one was, which related to ram fertility, coming back to your scanning comments earlier. Will thinner rams have poorer fertility? And will, again, the heat in the summer have affected their fertility?
Quite possibly, absolutely, yeah. I mean, they need to be in quite good condition. They're doing a lot of work in that very short period of time. And yeah, if they're in poorer condition or they've got a mineral deficiency, that can all affect the quality of the sperm and their ability to work. Similarly, if they're over fat as well, that can also, they're too fat, they're too lazy, they lie on their testicles, they keep them warm. That can all affect the sperm
Sounds like
quality
a
as well.
man's job, that does.
Typical men. But you know, it wasn't an ideal season at all, and you know that could possibly have affected the scanning percentages as well.
There was a bit of a sales pitch halfway through all the questions that I posted on there, which was if you do want a refractometer, then we can supply them from the shops. Well worth it.
Yeah,
very, very cost effective as well. I'm sure they'd love to see you in a farm centre to look at one. Another question was, is there anything we can do to bridge the gap between birth and good lamb immunity? And in particular, I think they were identifying, as they called it, the small squirty bottles. So that it used to be for R.M.Jones. You might have to help me out here because I can't remember the name of the product. But the bottles that you could squirt into the lamb's mouth for
Do you mean the antibiotics, John?
That's there's the antibiotic one, but there's the modern
they're
ones
not so
now, the newer
available now,
ones,
are
aren't
they?
there? Nutritional supplements.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So there's lots of different things on the market, isn't there? Do you mean like the things like the Kickstart and
That's the ones,
all those kind of things? Yeah. I mean, nothing really replaces good quality colostrum. You know, the key is to get that colostrum. But if you have got doubts that your colostrum's maybe not where it needs to be, or they haven't taken what they needed, then yes, there's a number of different supplements on the market that will just give those animals a little bit of a boost, and help them get going. But my key message would be, from a nutritionist point of view, you can't beat the colostrum, to be honest, and getting on top of that and getting that nutrition into them before lambing.
Yeah, so the probiotics can help, but it's no substitute really for getting the ewes in good condition. Yeah. Second, another question was, do the silage analysis that we get back show the DUP and bypass protein levels in the forage? I know I've seen them in the past where they just have crude protein, but I don't think they show the quality or the breakdown of the protein in there.
They don't as standard. And I mean, a lot of protein in silages is rumen degradable. We know that. What you will often see, and it's often in very, very small print, and it tends to be on silages rather than on hays, but you will see an A, B, and C value for the dry matter. So you'll see ADM, BDM, CDM, and then you'll see the same for the nutrition. So an ACP and it's an AN, isn't it, and a BN, and that's looking at that helps to tell you how degradable that A is in the rumen. And I'm not going to explain. I will switch people off if I talk about what the A and the B value means, but that's kind of looking at the degradability.
I think we'll have a chat afterwards another day, and you can explain to us, and then we can at least identify and look. And then you can
talk to people about those values. Plans, but if you look at a silage analysis, it's often very, very small. They don't.
Then someone's asked, is feeding on the bedding, if it's clean, obviously, a good idea? I guess with ewe rolls or ewe nuts, it's possible. Ewe rolls, you probably want the bigger feed, I would think, but
I don't see that there's an issue with that. But obviously, you've got to be. It's about hygiene. It's about good hygiene. You know, if you're happy that bedding is completely clean and you don't have an alternative, then it stops pushing and shoving at a feed face. You know, snackers have been used outside for a long time and very successfully, so I suppose it's the same idea, but again, you've got to make sure that you've got that space to be able to do that, and it's a clean environment to do it in.
Okay. Well, I've done it in the past and it seemed to work, but again, I've always had dry. Yes, needs to be dry bedding. I know in the past I've fed things like peahorn, which is the best way to keep using busy and sort of always moving, which I think helps stops lambing difficulties because it keeps them active.
That helps them, as long as they're fit and they're moving around, that helps to reduce things like prolapse. And there's a lot more to prolapse than that. We could spend all evening talking about what causes prolapse, but certainly we know that fitter animals tend to have a reduced risk, and yeah, if they're up and moving.
Yeah. And the last one I have, unless there's any more come in, which was, what can I feed with my oats in the trough? So it's is there other products we can be feeding in? I know we supply proteins along those that we can do mixes like that, but is that the sort of thing we can feed in there? And are they going to be good enough quality to feed in with oats to provide a good ration?
Yeah, I mean, you've got a couple of options there with the oats. You know, you could go down the soya route or a protein route, but you've got no minerals and vitamins in there. By buying a already sort of formulated protein like you guys have got, they're all mineralized as well. So then that would alleviate the need to top up with a mineral, and they would make quite a nice mix. And they tend to be quite simple for terms of calculating how much protein you've got in your final diet as well.
I know we've done stuff with them in the past, but I thought it'd be better if it came from you. They aren't just sort of how it works, but they are very competitively priced as well. So when it compares to with soya and then buying minerals in, etc., and they work really well. I think they work
absolutely
with feeding them
if you've got homegrown cereals.
It's a great way of doing it.
And oats are really nice as well on the approach to lambing as well, because they're quite kind. They're not too fizzy in the room, and they've got quite a nice balance of energy and digestible fibre. And
the oils in them seem to work quite well. I've got one question, which is, where does molasses fit into this? Because I've always quite liked molasses in a ration. How can that work well in a lambing yard without being too messy?
There's a couple of ways. You can use it on, if you've got a poorer quality forage, you can pour it onto forage, and that helps with the digestibility and the intake of a forage. I've seen it being used in lick feeders, so just left out free access for animals to take, and that's quite an effective way of reducing the risk of twin lamb, because it's a really good high energy hit basically for those animals. But the thing to remember with molasses is there's no minerals in them, or it's a very low mineral level. So it needs to be fed alongside. If you're feeding compound that's got minerals in, but you're a bit concerned it's maybe a bit lower in sugar, then there could be an option. But I like it on forages to help with that digestibility of forages. But appreciate that's not ideal for people to be watering can foraging onto forages, molasses around. But
sometimes ring feeder, it could be a challenge.
But it has got a place. It's just different systems.
Does anyone else have any other questions? Because they can just put them in the chat box at the top or the Q&A box. We can have a look at both. If you do, post it away, because it'd be good to get a few more questions. I've got something in the Q&A box, which is a sales pitch actually for me, and which is Optilix high energy ideal for feeding ewes in this wet weather. I quite agree, Ian. Well, yeah, that's spot on. So if you want Optilix, they're probably as good as it gets on the market, really. I think our competitors have alternatives which aren't anywhere near as good, obviously, and they aren't as well good value. So by all means, pop into a shop and sort some out, or give us a call.
The Optilix is a nice product because aside from obviously its difference in terms of its manufacturing and its high sugar, but it's also got protected elements in there, which is, they're highly available. So on the approach to lambing, the protected zinc, the protected selenium, really important for that ewe as well. So it is a really nice product.
I think, compared to some of the alternatives on the market, they do tend to have better trace element content, don't they? Here we go. What about feeding Swedes? David Saunders, what about feeding Swedes or fodder beet prior to lambing?
Yeah, all good. The only thing you really need to consider is that they're eating them equally, otherwise they'll get more protein. If they're only eating the tops and they're not eating the base, then they get more protein and they don't get the energy. But if they eat them evenly and they're not too frozen, then they're good. But don't forget they need a mineral supplement, because they're probably providing good levels of energy and protein, but you'll probably need to top up with some kind of mineral.
What about fibre in with those? Will there be enough fibre in Swedes and fodder beet alone, or will they need to have hay, straw, silage out in the
I
paddock?
would
wouldn't you?
recommend some forage out, and it usually you'd put some run back, wouldn't you, and a couple of bales out, and I would recommend some haylage or something out there for them. Yeah.
Yeah. The tops are low and aren't going to have enough fibre in them to maintain mating function.
No.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Anyone else? Come on, poke some in there. Now's your chance. I'm going to have a quick look to make sure there's nothing on my text messages. There's nothing there. Nothing on my emails, apart from some scurrilous comments from someone. But apart from that, well, I think that sounds like we're done for the night. Thank you very much, Alison. Really appreciate your help. Just so everyone knows, if you do need any on-farm support, then Alison is available to either talk on the phone or come out and we can catch up on farm, look at specific issues. Or if you want just basic rations done, let us know. We can do those both in-house, and Alison will provide support for those as well if needed.
Absolutely, yeah, no problem.
Okay, thank you everyone, and good night for tonight.
Thanks everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good night.